Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be talking about something fascinating today, paroxysms.
Mm.
I know you had some really interesting questions about sudden outbursts and all those surges of emotion, so we brought in an expert to kind of unpack this whole concept with us.
Yeah, happy to be here. This is something that I think we don't talk about enough, and it really impacts our lives in so many ways.
Yeah, and I was really drawn to something you wrote about like managing those intense emotions, especially, around a romantic interest. You even talked about closing your eyes when someone you liked walked by.
Yeah.
And I totally get that, like feeling overwhelmed by a sudden surge of emotion.
Yeah, it's a common experience, I think. We just don't often talk about it. It makes you feel like maybe you're the only one who's feeling that way. But this really gets into the whole idea of emotional intelligence.
Yeah,
Right. It's not just knowing what's going on with you, but it's also being really in tune to what's going on with other people, and especially in relationships.
Mm.
Being able to read those cues and respond in the right way is crucial.
Right, yeah. Being able to kind of step outside yourself and see the other person's perspective.
Absolutely.
Okay, but here's the thing that I was really struck by. You also talked about being able to withstand those crushing blows,
Hmm.
bouncing back from failures.
Hmm.
And, that resilience you described, that seems like such a key skill in dealing with, the emotional roller coaster of life.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And what's so interesting to me is that resilience isn't this like thing you're either born with or you're not. Like
Yeah.
some people have it, some people don't actually. Research shows that it's a skill and you can develop it through experience.
Okay.
Like every time you face a setback, you can learn and you can adapt. And when you do that, you're strengthening that resilience.
Oh, I love that. Like it's a muscle.
Yeah, it is. It is like a muscle.
Yeah.
You got to work it out.
So you're not just born with it. You work it out and you develop it over time. I
Absolutely.
like that a lot.
Okay.
Okay, so you also brought up this question about the line between a healthy emotional release and an outburst. Like, when does it cross over?
Yeah.
You had this example of the lottery winner where, like, sudden wealth leads to bad behavior. That really got me thinking.
Yeah, that's such a great example, I think, because it shows how important context is, when it comes to expressing how we're feeling.
Yeah.
Like, it's great to be authentic, share your feelings, but you also have to think about the impact on the people around you.
Right.
There's a difference between, like, venting frustration and intentionally causing harm to someone.
Totally. Yeah, and you had a really funny way of describing this. Oh, you talked about the repressed fart. I have to admit, it made me laugh.
Yeah.
But it also highlights, like, what can happen when we bottle things up for too long.
Yeah, I think sometimes humor is a good way to talk about things that are, we don't always feel comfortable talking about.
Yep.
But you're right,
Yeah.
it's not always about keeping it all in, but it's finding a way to express it in a way that's healthy. Sometimes it's a good laugh, sometimes it's a heartfelt conversation. Sometimes it's just going for a walk to kind of release that pent-up energy.
Right.
Yep.
So finding that balance is key, like not keeping it bottled up,
Yeah.
but also not, exploding.
Absolutely.
You also talked about how a surge of energy, whether it's, positive or negative,
Yeah.
can really have a big impact on our decisions. You talked about a failing marriage and how like repressed feelings led to a huge reaction.
Yeah.
But you also talked about how, that initial spark of romantic attraction can really drive us toward connection.
Right. And it's interesting because in a way it's the same thing. Like it's this buildup of emotional energy, whether it's negative or positive, that can sort of propel us, in a certain direction. And I think that really speaks to the idea of emotional momentum.
Oh, yeah.
When we try to just suppress emotions, they don't just disappear. They can build up almost like a pressure cooker. And then we end up doing things that we weren't even really expecting. And that could be ending a relationship suddenly. Or it could be like taking a leap of faith into a new romance. It's kind of wild how like the same intense emotions that can cause us to, act impulsively can also be like the driving force behind positive change.
Right. So it's like this double-edged sword. Like, how do we harness that?
Absolutely.
You mentioned emotional regulation. Like finding that sweet spot between, letting those emotions flow, but also keeping them in check.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that?
Right.
It's easy to like say that, but in the heat of the moment, it feels impossible sometimes.
Yeah, you're totally right. And it's a skill, just like anything else, it takes practice.
Yeah.
One thing that I found really helpful is mindfulness, like just paying attention to your emotions
Yeah.
as they come up. And the key here is without judgment, So just noticing like, oh, this is what I'm feeling. This is what's happening in my body. This is what's happening in my mind. And that can help you create a little bit of space to weighing the emotion and how you react to it.
Okay. So it's like hitting the pause button before you react.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just that pause, even if it's just for a couple of seconds,
Yeah.
can give you that chance to choose a response that's maybe a little bit more skillful.
Okay. Makes sense. But what about those situations where it feels like things are just completely out of control? You know those moments where you just can't seem to get a grip?
Right.
Like you told that story about getting angry in the hospital lobby and your mom helping you to calm down just by like holding your hand and unclenching your fist.
Right.
I thought that was so powerful.
It is a powerful example. And I think what's so interesting about that is it shows the mind-body connection.
Right.
Like when we're having those intense feelings, our body's reacting too.
Yeah.
You know, we tense up, our breathing gets faster, our heart starts racing.
Wow.
So by focusing on the physical stuff and like consciously relaxing your muscles, slowing down your breath, or like even finding something grounding to touch, that can actually help you start to regulate your emotion.
Wow. So like a simple gesture
Yeah.
can actually have a big impact.
It really can. And another strategy, if you can, is to just remove yourself from the situation.
Right.
Sometimes just stepping away from an argument or like a stressful environment can give you the space you need to kind of reset.
Makes sense. Like hit the reset button. But
Yeah.
what if you can't physically remove yourself from the situation?
Right.
Like what if you're in the middle of a meeting or you're at a family gathering? What do you do then?
Even then, you can create a sense of distance, like internally.
Okay.
So this could be like mentally taking a step back,
Yeah.
you know, focusing on your breath, maybe repeating a calming phrase or mantra to yourself. It's about finding ways to feel that inner peace, even when there's chaos happening around you.
Oh, wow. So even if you can't like physically escape,
Yeah.
you can kind of mentally detach and create that sense of calm.
Exactly. And remember, emotional regulation is a process. You know, it's not like you just arrive at this place where you're perfect.
Right.
You're going to have times when you handle things really well, and then sometimes you're going to look back and be like, ugh, I wish I hadn't done that. But you know what? It's okay.
Right.
The key is to be kind to yourself and to learn from those experiences.
That's such a good reminder. You know, we're all human. We're all going to have moments where we don't react in the best way.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's okay. It's about understanding ourselves better and finding those ways to cope with all the ups and downs of life. You know, speaking of learning and growth, you also talked about how our brains prioritize certain memories, the ones that are really emotionally charged. You even call them core memories. And you were explaining how those memories can actually teach us important lessons.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. Like, we tend to remember the things that really evoked a strong response from us,
Right.
whether it was good or bad. And those memories kind of get embedded in our brains.
Right.
And they start to shape our beliefs and our behaviors and, you know, how we see the world.
So it's not just like a random snapshot from the past. Like
Yeah.
these memories really become a part of who we are.
They do. They really do. And they affect how we see new experiences and how we make decisions and how we interact with the world. They can be like reminders of important things we've learned, or warnings about potential pitfalls, or sources of inspiration and strength, you know?
Well, yeah. And I think that's what really got me thinking about, like, can we consciously create those positive core memories? You know, like if we know our brains are going to grab onto those moments, can we be intentional about making more of the good ones?
I love that question. I think that's brilliant. And it's something that researchers are really starting to look into now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like there's more and more evidence that shows that. Practices like keeping a gratitude journal or doing mindfulness meditation or even doing acts of kindness for other people
Okay.
can actually strengthen the connections in your brain that are associated with positive emotions.
So it's like we can actually train our brains to focus on the good stuff.
Yeah. It's like building up this reservoir
Yeah.
of joy and resilience and love that you can draw on whenever you need it.
I love that. It's so empowering. Like we have the power to shape our own emotional landscape.
You do.
And that brings us back to something you said earlier about finding balance. Remember that gambling analogy you used?
Yeah.
I thought that was really insightful.
Well, when we make decisions just based on our feelings, like when you're gambling, it can be really risky. It's about finding that middle ground between our emotions and our rational thinking.
Can you say more about that? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, sure. You know, our emotions are super powerful, but they don't always give us the full picture.
Okay.
And when we get swept up in them, it's easy to forget about logic and do things we regret later. Think about it. Have you ever sent a text when you were angry and then later you're like, I wish I could take that back?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think we've all been there.
Yeah. Or like bought something you couldn't afford because you were feeling down and you wanted to cheer yourself up.
Guilty. Yeah.
It's those times when we let our emotions take over completely that we can really get into trouble. And I'm not saying that emotions are bad
Right.
or that we should always try to ignore them. It's more about recognizing that emotions are one piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture.
Right. So it's like finding that balance.
Yeah.
Like honoring those feelings, but not letting them run the show.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about integrating your emotional intelligence with your ability to think things through. Taking a moment to pause and reflect and consider what might happen before you make a decision.
So it's like our heart and our mind working together.
I love that.
Yeah.
Finding that harmony.
Yeah. I like that. This has been such an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all this with us today.
My pleasure.
And to our listener, I hope this has been really helpful.
Yeah, I hope you've gained some valuable insights and some tools that you can use to deal with these complex emotions.
Wow, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've covered so much.
Uh-huh.
From those intense outbursts, those paroxysms, to emotional intelligence and how we regulate those emotions. And even how our brains remember things, based on how strongly we felt in those moments.
It really shows how emotions are like woven into every part of our lives. They affect our relationships, our decisions, even how we look back on our past.
It makes me think about what you said about resilience being like a muscle that we can exercise and strengthen. I wonder if the same thing applies to emotional regulation.
Mm.
If we think of it as a skill we can develop over time, does it make it less scary? When those really big, overwhelming feelings hit.
That's a really good point. If we see it as something we can build up, it takes the pressure off of needing to be perfect, right?
Right.
It lets us approach it with more curiosity. Like, okay, let's try this. Let's see what happens. Knowing that some days are better than others. Sometimes we nail it. Sometimes we mess up.
Yeah, and I think that ties into what you were saying about being kind to ourselves. It's okay to not be perfect. What matters is that we keep learning and keep trading. But I also want to circle back to those core memories. If our brains are wired to remember those emotionally charged moments so vividly, should we try to create more of the positive ones on purpose?
I think so. If those memories are going to stick with us, why not focus on making more of the good ones? The ones that bring us joy and make us feel connected and fulfilled.
Right.
Like if we can choose what kind of emotional world we build for ourselves.
Yeah, it's empowering.
Oh.
It's not just letting life happen to us. We're actually shaping it.
Absolutely. And there are so many ways to do that. We can practice gratitude, we can savor those little happy moments, we can build strong relationships, and we can chase after the things we're passionate about. Even simple things like being kind to other people can make a difference. We create good memories for ourselves and for those around us.
It's like planting little seeds of happiness that keep growing even after the moment is gone. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into paroxysms and all those big emotional waves, I want to leave you with this. What positive experiences can you cultivate in your life? What can you do starting today to build up that inner strength and find inspiration? Thanks for joining us on this journey. And to you, expert speaker, thank you so much for sharing all these amazing insights. Until next time, keep diving deep.